research professor at Natural Resources Institute Finland, and I'm based in Helsinki, so other edge of the Finland. Let's say it in this way. So thank you for invitation to this seminar, and I will talk about climate change mitigation potential of land use sector and management of peatlands, forests, and thank you Hillevi for starting this discussion about peatland forests already in your presentation. I will continue from that. Natural Resources Institute in brief, I would like to show you this brief concise information, but I emphasize that climate smart carbon cycle is one of the focus area major themes what we are studying at the moment according to our new strategy. So climate issues and carbon smart management practices are really emphasized in our current strategy. But I promised to talk about climate change mitigation and land use, role of land use in there. I will start from this figure, which has been shown many times. It's compiled by Global Carbon Project, and they update information every year. So if you want to find compiled information about global carbon cycles and greenhouse gas balances and so on, you can go to Global Carbon Project, and they provide updated information every year. But this figure overall, it sums up what is the global emissions and how they are divided to fossil fuel emissions and emissions from land use sector, and then these are the emission parts, and on the right hand side there are carbon sinks, and only 44% of the produced or emitted CO2 remain in atmosphere. There are carbon sinks both in forests and in oceans, and role of forests and other terrestrial ecosystems is really large. About 1/3 of the emitted CO2 is sequestrated to forests, and they have had that role for a long time. In this figure, it's illustrated that these are the emissions from all different sources, and globally altogether they could have increased atmospheric CO2 concentration up to 550 part per millions. But due to these two players, carbon sinks of forests and carbon sinks of oceans, current atmospheric CO2 concentration is 400 parts per million, which is of course much higher than it used to be before this industrial era. But anyhow, the role of carbon sinks have been large and will be large, hopefully also in the future. So knowing this importance, EU has included forest carbon sinks to climate targets. Currently, they compensate about 10% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in Europe. So if you remember from previous slide, it's they role globally was 30%, and in Europe the sink compensate 10% of the total emissions. And the role of carbon sinks it's already acknowledged by countries and international negotiations. Developing countries has included the forest carbon sinks or sinks of whole land use sector in the nationally determined contributions, which is part of the Paris Agreement. Every country who has ratified Paris Agreement, they submit their plans, how they are aiming to decrease emissions or increase their sinks, and sinks are included in many of those reports. And things are, this is just to say that things are also reported in greenhouse gas inventories. So there is already a monitoring system for this, and it's improving all the time, and accuracy of the inventory systems have to be improved all the time. Then I come to Finland, and this is the trends in emissions and removals of the whole land use sector. And negative values are carbon sinks and positive values are sources. And this is only now land use sectors. In addition to this, what I'm showing here, we have emissions from emission sectors, and in Finland they are altogether 52 point something million tons of CO2 equivalents. But here I'm showing what happens in land use sector. There is this part is sinks, and there is a large annual variation of the sinks, which is due to variation in harvest. More we harvest, less we have sinks. And then we have also harvested wood products. They are sink on average, but relatively small in comparison to forest sink. And in land use sector, we have also sources. So croplands are emission sources. If we have a closer look on soil, what happens in soil, we have this is the whole land area in Finland, which is 24.6 million hectares, divided to forest land, which is this largest part, forest land on mineral soils, and then about 1/4 is forest land on organic soil, on peat soil, and then this fraction is croplands. Most of the croplands are on mineral soil, but then we have a small fragment of croplands on peat soil. And highest emissions what we have in land use sector, they come from croplands on peat soil, but also from forests on peat soil we have high emissions from the soil. Trees are carbon sinks also in this piece of the land. So as a whole, they are carbon sinks, but soil is decomposing peat is producing high emissions in there. Then I come to forest drainage intensity in Finland. This is quite a weird record. We really have high proportion of the peatlands drained, and as I told already during the discussion, maintenance of the ditch network is subsidized at the moment, and hopefully there will be change in that funding source, and these subsidies won't be available in the future. But at the moment, landowners they get subsidies when they maintain ditches of the forested peatlands. And what influences this huge drainage effort has produced, sorry, now this slide is in Finnish. I didn't have time to fully translate that, but this is saying that more than half of the peatland types are treated in Finland, and these are different peatlands types. And the first one is spruce-dominated, relatively fertile peatlands, and so on. And message from this slide is that many peatland types are treated, and and we don't see that these certain type of peatlands, korvet, neva- ja lettokorvet, and lehdot. Sorry, I don't have English translation now. We don't have any nice view and plans how to protect them. We are losing them totally. So effects of drainage on biodiversity and peatland types, it's really harmful and confirmed many times. Then we already know that drained peatlands are also high emission sources, and that holds for most fertile peatlands. So don't worry about details. I don't expect that any one of you will read all this information, but there are scientific publications, and this is not the only one, saying that especially most fertile peatlands are emission source, or peat soil in there is the emission source, and that's because the peat is so fertile that in aerobic conditions it's decomposing fast. In poor, less fertile peatlands, peat is too quality of the peat is different, and it's not decomposing that fast. So that's the reason why the signal is opposite. But anyhow, fertile peatlands should be in focus when we try to find climate smart management practices. Then we have analyzed where we have those peatlands which are currently emission hotspots, and we have integrated modeling and stand level data, and this is example for northern Karelia, from where we had all more than 100,000 peatland parcels in our database, and we calculated with the SPAFU model, the hydrology of the site, and integrated emission estimates which predict emissions as the function of the soil water table, and compiling all this information, we got the map where we have all these parcels which are owned by Metsähallitus, or they are ruling them. And now we have calculated whether they are emission sources or carbon sinks. And because government owns most or less fertile sites in this region, we actually see quite few emission hotspots here. They are shown in red color, and now the Metsähallitus know the locations where they should reconsider their management practices if they want to decrease the emissions from peat soil. So we have located these emission hotspots with this methodology, combining field data, hydrology model, and emission models. This is a bit more about this hydrology model. With such model, we are able to say what is relationship between tree basal area, which is here in x-axis, and soil water table, and we are saying that by thinning regime and by continuous cover forestry, we can maintain the basal area at the level where we have soil water table at favorable level, and favorable for growth of trees and for greenhouse gas emissions would be to keep water table at approximately 30 centimeters. So from these small figures, we know that by management activities, it's feasible to control water table, and we don't need further ditching or maintenance of the ditch network in there. So this is published paper, and you can read more details and understand whole story by reading that. I will continue to next slide. This illustrates the concept of continuous cover forestry, what we are now testing in our experimental sites. We say that it may reduce emissions from peat soil, and how is the situation in rotation-based forestry? We have water table there, and when we have full stocked mature stand, something almost 100 years or so, and ditches, we have water table which is really very low, and this illustrates the situation there. And if we go for clear cutting, it means that water table will be elevated, but then we need ditches, and by ditches it's decreased, and in conditions when water table is very low, we have high CO2 emissions, and when it's almost up to the surface, it means that we have methane emissions, and this illustrates what happens to CO2 emissions and methane emissions. And so meaning that deeper the water table, higher the CO2 emissions, and if the water table is deeper than 30 centimeters, we won't see any remarkable methane emission. This is to illustrate that, and this is experimental data showing this relationship between methane emissions. And what we do with continuous cover forestry, we try to maintain water table at favorable levels, so not too deep for high CO2 emissions and not too high for methane emissions. We try to keep that in about 30 centimeters, and that's possible with a certain amount of trees, which was illustrated here in previous slide. So this is just to illustrate some spruce dominated sites where we are testing this method, continuous cover forestry. And here is kind of repetition what I already explained with the previous slide, how water table affect exchange of different greenhouse gases. I will continue to next slide. So we know that carbon dioxide, methane, and N2O fluxes from peatland forest, they are affected by water table, as I explained, and they are also affected by site fertility. And now here the gray bar is fertile site, and white one is the least fertile peatland sites. And here we can sum up that soil is emission source when we have fertile soil. On least fertile sites, there is a small stink of greenhouse gases, especially methane is sequestrated here. And as the whole, if we take into consideration also trees, these sites which are here in this figure, they are not open clear-cut areas, but they are mature stands, and in those cases trees are carbon sinks, and as a whole these sites are carbon sinks, but still we spot our eyes to these emissions from soil, because here situation represent mature forest, and after clear cutting, this carbon sink of trees is gone, and we have only these emissions left. Then the next slide is saying that continuous cover forestry is more profitable than rotation forestry on drained peatland forest. This is I have two slides here, two figures to illustrate that. This is mean annual increment. A yellow line represents the level what we have in rotation forestry, and here we have different cases for intensity and an interval of the thinnings, and the first column is for thinning, where remaining amount of trees after thinning is very low. It's only 4 square meters per hectare, and the last one is post-harvest basal area is 16 square meters per hectare. And then the first set of cases, it's with the harvesting interval of 10 years, and the second one is with harvesting interval of 15 years. And here we can see that if we have these cases where remaining amount of remaining trees is higher than 8 square meters per hectare, basal area higher than 8 square meters per hectare, mean annual increment is larger than in rotation-based forestry on average. And this illustrates also what is the optimal harvesting interval and post-harvest basal area in this continuous cover forestry. So we find an optimal case where we recommend that harvesting interval could be every 15 years, and basal post-harvest basal area what you leave to the site should be 10 square meters. But also differences between these options, they are not too large, which is good news for forest owners. It's not so critical that he follow strictly this rule. It can be also 12 square meters or 8, doesn't really change too much. And harvesting interval, it doesn't have to be 15. If he decide to extend that to some years, it doesn't make big change. So anyhow, this is profitable to forest owners. At the moment, we have quite many sites where we have ongoing experiments where we test continuous cover forestry in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and growth of trees and water nutrient leakage to the water loading and so on. We have quite intensive measurements in some of our sites, and we hope to have more results in coming 2 years from these projects. So thank you.
Good. We have quite enough time also for comments and discussion later. But first, Hillevi, are you ready there?
Yes, yes.
Please.
Yeah. First, I will just add that I have a background as I have a forester's education, and I have a background as a soil scientist. So I took my PhD in forest soil science. Just adding, so that as background to why I put some of my questions also. Yeah, thank you very much, Raisa, for a very interesting and really dense speak, a lot of information. And it's so interesting for me because we are not only working on this practical rewetting, but we have also, me and a colleague have been working on a on a review on the climate impact of both continuous use of drain maintenance and rotation forestry, and on one side, and re-wetting on the other side. So we have been really looking through all this literature, at least not all, but a lot, I should say. So you will see. But I will start with the background. I think you had a very good, interesting background, and very many pedagogic figures that I will steal to my future, or I will look up this global carbon project that I know is a very good source of information. Yes. I start with a question on the background. You show the carbon budget for Finnish forests, and you said this in a sentence that the less we harvest, the higher the sink. So then when your students ask you the obvious question, then why don't we harvest much less for the sake of climate? What is your answer?
My answer is that that harvesting is not due to climate policy. It's due to needs of the human society, needs for the timber resources and all the items what we are gaining. If the only purpose for forest management would be the climate change mitigation, then the case would be different. But the purpose of the forest management and forestry is not climate change mitigation.
Okay.
And then I think that this first one have to understand that it's we have not designed forest management, and we shouldn't do anything. If the only target would be climate change mitigation, then the answer is do nothing, and that would solve the problem. Some restoration and revetting you could do, but then do nothing. But forestry and forest management we do for some other reasons, and now we are looking for compromise where we can continue with the use of forest resources and decrease negative environmental effects as much as possible. So that's this kind of looking for compromise.
Okay. You don't mix in the substitution effect in your
substitution. It's a field of research, I would say, where one have to do a lot, and we have experts and scientists who are working on that. But we have also calculated what would be kind of harvested wood products. What we have calculated is not substitution, but if we start from that, current situation in Finland is such that during the last 10 or 20 years, structure of forest industry has changed to direction, which means that carbon sink of harvested wood products is decreasing and not increasing. So from there, we don't see any solutions. And then if we go for substitution, then I think that routine calculations still need more detailed information about effects, what you substitute, and how much you gain from that. So there is a lot to do. There is some hope, yes, but we have to do more and improve the methodologies and really show where we can gain a lot by substitution, and where it's so little that it doesn't solve the problem. It might be nice to have wood products more here and there, but how much they substitute and what we need more information and more research on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree, and it's also a changing reality is changing. Society is changing so fast, and the alternatives. So it's a moving target.
Yeah, yeah.
I've been
And
trying in this investigation also to frame it, and also because the question there is what will happen if we don't have this material from the drained peatland? What is competing? And then the reasoning is that perhaps especially in a future, in some decades, it's not so much other materials as wood from mineral soils, not peatland. Is the main competition.
Yeah, you're right. Especially in Finland, this growing stock, what we have in Finland, forest resources, 1/4 is now on peatland forests, and annual growth increment, 1/4 of that is on peatland sites. But we have to find a sustainable way to manage them. Now we have ignored all the other issues but timber production, and as I told, even economic sustainability is ignored. So there is only timber production with any costs, and that cannot be continued. So if we see that it's economic sustainable, if it's economically more profitable to convert management practices to those who have less negative environmental impact, we have all reasons to do that quickly. And in our case, we are not just riveting peatlands and leaving them out from production. We try to find a compromise when we can continue timber production in there. And we already calculated what happens to overall timber harvests if we convert all fertile sites in southern Finland at the stage when they come to harvest age or dimensions. If we, instead of clear cutting, if we convert to continuous cover forestry, it means that carbon sink is increased quite a lot and timber yield is reduced, but not too much. So it's also a good compromise to if you reduce harvests from somewhere, reduce a little bit from peatlands and gain large carbon sink there. But this is not in scientific publications yet. It's in one of the preliminary results are reported in one report, but scientific paper is coming by end of this year, I hope.
Yes, I have one practical question on that actually, because I understand it that this continuous cover forestry, the aim is to keep the water table is around, was it 20-30 centimeters below ground? And then my question is, have you or someone in this looked at the possibility to use machinery on such on the risk for track formation and the soil stability issue maybe?
Anyhow, harvesting and machinery in peatland forests, it's we have to wait for proper winter period to make it.
That's because that in southern Sweden we cannot rely on that anymore. But in Finland you can still.
In northern Finland, yes, but we are having risks and uncertainty in southern Finland, and that's, by the way, the reason why we have increasing growing stock, especially on peatlands, because it's not possible to harvest when it's planned to be harvested. There is no real winter and it's no go with the heavy machinery. So there might be some development, but anyhow, that's one risk. But it's realized already now. It's not related to this water table. It's already now when we have well-trained peatlands. Still, it's no go during the wet period and without frost.
Okay, I have a final question, but it's a complicated one. I want to know, because you showed this table of which type peatland types that are net emitters and which even are estimated to have a certain uptake, even though they are drained. The least fertile in northern Finland, and as we assume also in Sweden then, because we are relying on the Finnish results on this. And I have looked into the literature, and it's kind of different methodologies reaching the same result. But still, have you put yourself the question, how can this be possible? Because it was the lack of oxygen that made the peat grow once. How come when we drain those soils, how can it be that the peat is not decomposing, even though maybe at a very slow rate and maybe with a lag phase? How come that we estimate that there is still an increase in the carbon content of the soil?
Yeah. When we discuss about those least fertile sites where nutrient concentrations in peat are very low, and that's reason why they are decomposing slowly. Then it's balanced between this slow decomposition and input of new carbon. And when we have trained them for forestry and maybe done something to improve site productivity, then the tree growth and produced litter is higher than this carbon dioxide release from slowly decomposing peat. So it's this balance. So trees, when they grow, even if they grow relatively slow, but anyhow carbon input from growing trees is higher than emissions, and it's a net exchange what we are showing in those tables.
But do you think
but
what
in
do you think will
fertile
happen
sites
in the long
opposite
run? Because will this peat then remain as some kind of relict in the long run, or will it in the end disappear?
Old peat is decomposing and new organic matter is accumulating. But when we have clear cutting in there, that might slightly change the figure, because then you don't have this high biomass production of trees, and those measurements and those sites we have quite middle age and older stands in there, not clear cutting areas that much. And of course in clear cutting area, when it's only slow decomposition, slow peat decomposition is continuing and no input from growing trees, then the balance is different, and for some time of course there is a net release of CO2 from that peat. But in situation where we have relatively vigorous, in southern Finland, southern Sweden, you wouldn't see them vigorous, but anyhow, this is a balance between input and output.
Okay, thank you. That is an intriguing question. And I guess it also connects to the general question of what determines the size of the humus layer in northern Scandinavia. In the end, is it climate? Is it continuous growth until it burns even, or is it a continuous growth until we have the clear cut phase,
And our forests are that much affected by management, like clear cutting, that really have a large impact. And what we don't understand properly is the effect of clear cutting and this part of the cycle, what happens in different kinds of soils. But from peat soils, from those fertile, we have also measurements from clear cutting areas, and we are starting also new site where we will measure from by continuous measurements, eddy covariance, and automatic chambers. So we are learning more. But anyhow, there is a recent PhD thesis about that, clear cutting and continuous cover forestry and unmanaged. What are the emissions of soil in different blocks?
Yeah. Okay, then I have put my major questions, and I have learned a lot about this continuous cover forest thinking and knowledge development, and I will actually try to extend our investigation a bit on that matter now when I have got some sources. And I will thank you for the comprehensive speech you made, and very interesting.
Thank you for mentioning that review. When it's ready, I'm more than happy to read that. So let me know when it's published.
It's only in Swedish. I'm sorry.
I can read Swedish. I can read. Don't worry.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for both of you. It was really interesting discuss, and now it's time for the questions. There was a question of that. Can the peatland in natural form will be better or greater carbon sink than ditched and forested peatland?
Answer is very simple. In long term, unmanaged natural peatlands are carbon sinks. There is a deep peat layer accumulated over 10,000 years. So in long term, there is accumulation of the carbon. And then what is the overall greenhouse gas balance? There might be emissions of methane and N2O, which are stronger greenhouse gases than CO2. Net effect is dependent on peatland type and dynamics of methane and N2O emissions. But in general, if you just make a decision based on climate change mitigation target, then you leave peatlands unmanaged.
And then Urpo Taskinen is asking that if we are commenting that if we understand that the main problems for the life on planet Earth is the decrease of biodiversity and climate change, shouldn't the society's main goal to really include the forests in solving that problem? Do you want to ask?
If I understand correctly the comment or question, I would say that role of forests in climate change mitigation is already acknowledged at very high level. I mean that they are already considered, and there is the climate targets and climate plans and agreements and so on, and forests are in there already. And there are already legally binding commitments how we should maintain or increase forest carbon sinks. And there are already agreements and commitments how biodiversity should be considered in forests, but there are not that strictly legally binding commitments yet. And I would say that these biodiversity and climate targets should be considered together at the same time, because many solutions what we can find, there are win-win solutions. What we do to improve forest carbon sequestration or to decrease emissions from peat soil, they might have also positive influence on biodiversity. And if we find measurements or measures which have negative influence on something, we should avoid them until we are confident that we can avoid negative influence, because there are so many things to do where we can find win-win situations for biodiversity and climate change mitigation. Hopefully I understood the comment correctly, so further questions are of course welcome if I misunderstood what you are meaning, Urpo.
Yes, Urpo can make a new question if needed. Then Dimitris is asking, CHP plants will stop using peat extraction by 2030. In these open peatlands, there is often much peat left that will decompose. Is it not better to use peat than let it decompose? What is the best after-use option?
Best after-use option, it depends on topography of the site. In some of the sites are such that you could revet them and initiate development of peatland and peat accumulation again. So if the topography of the site allows, you try to regenerate new peatland or revet that and restore that as a natural wetland or peatland. But some of those sites are such that topography doesn't really allow you to collect enough water enough water for revetting, and then it's afforestation. What is your option there? But never leave open peat without vegetation. Never do that. And I think that at least in Finland, it's compulsory for peat mining companies that they convert those open peat areas to something. So they have to do something, and they have kind of three options: revetting to wetlands or peatlands, or afforestation to real forests.
We have still time, 10 minutes, but we have no questions just now. Are you willing to say something more to us? You have time, open speeches.
We can also close the session earlier if everyone is satisfied and learned enough. What I may want to emphasize is and I go back to, when I go back to my presentation, and I mentioned the croplands on peat soil. It's not only forests, but also croplands on peat soils where we see problems. There is a high emissions, and we really need to find sustainable management practices there. And there is linkage between peat mining and these croplands on peat soil, because if we stop all peat mining, it means that we won't get peat for energy production, and we won't get peat for animal beddings to keep them dry, and we won't get peat for growing media which is used in green houses and gardens. We have to find material which replace these, and there are quite promising even small scale companies are producing growth media from ruokohelpi and järviruoko, Phalaris arundinake, and so on. So grass species which grow on peat soil. So if we convert those emission hotspots, croplands on peat soil to grass production, which is after composting used as a growth media, we can replace peat, which comes now from peat mining areas. So we have to find solutions for all these problems if we want to avoid greenhouse gas emissions. So this is maybe something what I want to add. Full picture includes also sustainable management of croplands, and peat soil is problem also there.
Okay, and Hillevi sent a message there also for Svagnum, and but there is no more questions. I believe we are going to finish this session, but first I have to thank a lot of both of you, and that Raisa's researches were really interesting, and I believe they are quite new also, and I just hope as how can I say, researches in just as large scales will be done also in how can I say, drier lands, forest lands, especially when we study the purposes of continuous cover management and also other logging styles, that we can find the very best way to handle the forest, and when we are thinking at the same time biodiversity and other things and climate change. But I believe this is here, and I also thank all the attendees which have been with us. Some of you have been also in all the 4 lectures, and I believe we are going to continue this later, maybe next year, but I hope we can keep an ancient seminar in some very, how can I say, easily located place. But also I have learned that this kind of webinars are quite, how can I say, they are really easy to organize, and also we can think here now also this emissions which are coming from traveling. And in webinars we don't have any kind of this. Okay, very much thanks for everybody, and see you somewhere later.
So thank you, Vesa, for invitation, and enjoy your winter time there. Thank you. Bye bye.
Yeah, I would like to say thank you also for the invitation.
And these lectures will be also seen in YouTube later, and the attendees here can also, I believe, use this material which have been delayed here from both of you, if they first all, of course, say where they have taken this, because we have to give an honor to those who have made the slides. Okay, now I declare this stopped.
Okay, thank you.